So moving on, it was always my my motive to get into the airlines eventually, because as you probably know, Air Force pilots end up destined to drive desks, and that was not part of my plan. I didn't want to go into the management side of it and be in a ground job. I wasn't interested in that. So while I was doing all the military stuff, I went and got my ATPL subjects and the instrument ratings, etc., that were required, and then started applying to the airlines. Unfortunately, at that time, there was a bit of a downturn in the industry, and for about 4 years, no one was hiring. This was back in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. So I had to bide my time, and I applied to Qantas, I applied to Ansett, I applied to Cathay, and the first interview I got was with Qantas, and went through all the interview process and everything else, and I didn't get through. I wasn't successful, and I was a bit distraught about that, because they said that although you know, my application was okay, there were other people who were better qualified than I was for the job. And I thought, how many other people at 26 years old have got command time on an ex-Qantas aeroplane? And I was a bit confused by that. It turned out later that Qantas had actually done an unofficial handshake agreement with the Air Force to not poach the 707 qualified pilots. So you're never ever going to get a job at Qantas if you fly the 70. They actually reneged on that deal about 4 years later, when they took about 30 of the guys all at once. So anyway, that door was closed to me. I ended up in a ground job because I had the audacity to resign in order to try and get an airline job. And at that time, the chief of the air staff said, anybody who resigns is a malcontent and doesn't deserve to be in the Air Force anyway, and you're grounded, when you gave your 3 months notice. So I had a ground job for a while. Eventually Cathay came along and interviewed me and said, well, we like your experience, but you're too young. I was 27 at the time. You know, most people get told they're too old. I was too young, apparently. And I said, well, time will fix that, you know. So, and they hummed and hawed, and then they invited me up to Hong Kong and did the final interview and the simulator and everything else. And they said, well, we'll put you on the hold file. And in the meantime, I had to decide whether I was going to stay in the Air Force or you know, just become unemployed, because you know, my resignation date was looming and I didn't have a job. So I actually ended up retracting my resignation and thought, well, we'll wait and see what happens. And then I had to give notice again to re-resign, if you like. So I told Cathay that, but they forgot, and then they rang me up on New Year's Eve. In fact, I think the guy had a few drinks. And he rang me up and says, oh, I'll see if we can offer you a job. Can you start next week? And I said, no. So why not? And he said, well, I told you I actually had to give my notice again to the Air Force. And he said, oh, darn. He said, well, I guess I've offered you your job now. And I said, yes, you have. So he said, well, so when can you start really? I said, 3 months from tomorrow. So I re-resigned, and I started in April '85 in Cathay. Ended up on the 747 at the time. So they had, at that time, the fleet was 9 747s and 9 TriStars. So it was pretty much an equal split. The TriStars were doing the majority of the short haul, and the 74 was doing the majority of the long haul and ultra long haul flying, which Cathay pioneered. A lot of people don't know that Cathay were the first to do ultra long haul flying when they started flying non-stop from Hong Kong to London in 1983. And the reason they were able to do that was because the Rolls-Royce engines that they were powered by, Cathay basically had rescued Rolls-Royce from bankruptcy by ordering the Rolls-Royce engine for their TriStars when they decided to do that. They actually were going to buy DC-10s, and apparently the British government found out that Cathay were, you know, the colonies were going to buy DC-10s, and they didn't offer a British engine on that. So they said, sorry, you can't do that, you have to buy something with a British engine. So they went, well, Jumbo's too big, what else is there? And they said, well, there's a TriStar. Oh yes, you can get a Rolls-Royce engine for that. So they ordered about 7 of them to start with, and that basically got Rolls-Royce out of the poo. So later on, when they got the Jumbo, Cathay was treated as a preferential customer, and when they had their 3rd upgrade of the RB211 engine, in fact the 4th upgrade, the 524D4, it gave the thrust and fuel flow parameters that made it possible to fly non-stop between Hong Kong and London. And when they announced they were going to do that, all the other competitors are saying, how do they do that? You haven't got enough fuel to do that non-stop. You know, and they said, oh, if you've got the right engine, you have. And Cathay had a monopoly on these engines for about 3 years. So, they'd ordered them all, and everyone else had to wait. So, so it was very interesting, you know, flying over those distances because it was right on the very, very limits of the performance of the aeroplane.
When did they retire the ex-Qantas 707s? Was that
around about the same time, just before I joined, about end of '84. Yeah.
Where did they track from Hong Kong to London?
In those days, it was basically Alpha 1, which was through the Middle East. You went over southwest China, and then basically through Bangladesh, and then across India. Yeah. And then there was two ways you could go from there. It was either up through Afghanistan and then Iran, and then straight across the Middle East and then through southern Europe, or you could go up through Afghanistan into southern Russia or USSR and then go across south of Moscow and come in through northern Europe. So it depended on the time of the year and the winds as to which one they went for. But they're always going for the one that gave them the minimum burn and the minimum time, so it was dependent on the winds and the time of year.
What's the normal airflow in the northern hemisphere, whereas we've got sort of west?
Yeah, it's still westerly winds there,
west.
yeah, but they're stronger in winter time just as they are here. So they used to try and go further north in the winter time because the subtropical jet was around about the Middle Eastern latitude, so if you get it north of that, then it wasn't so bad, not as bad. But they used to end up, you know, landing in London sometimes on vapours. Like our normal policy was basically 30 minutes and an alternate airport, so which normally gave you a minimum of an hour, which is not a huge amount for an airliner. And once you were within an hour of landing, you could actually burn that down to 30 minutes if you had more than one airport you could go to.
What was your alternate?
Well, we used to go to Gatwick, and our alternate was Heathrow, which was 28 miles away. Right. That's about all we had fuel for. So, and then later on they reversed it and we got into Heathrow, and then Gatwick was our alternate. But some days the winds were so strong you actually you couldn't take any freight or any bags. So you could take the passengers, but they weren't too impressed if you took them off to London without their bags. So a couple of times they did this, but they decided it was too risky. They'd actually check in their bags and actually stick them on the freighter. Yeah. And depart an hour before the passenger flight, and that would then go via the Middle East and tech stop in Abu Dhabi, go on to London, and then they'd land in London and say, "Where's my bags?" "Oh, it'll be along shortly, so it won't be long now." And then about an hour after the passenger airplane landed, the freighter would land with the bags.
Full passenger complement. Full passenger.
Yeah, they could take a full passenger complement, but basically no freight.
So the crew bags made of it, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah.